Wow, it's Joe Pardavila. Welcome back to another episode of Forbes Books Radio. Fashion is a nearly $3 trillion global industry. That's trillion with a T. You can probably guess by the sound of my voice I'm not very fashionable, but joining me today is Aslaug Magnúsdóttir. She's an entrepreneur, investor, and the CEO and founder of Katla, a direct-to-consumer sustainable fashion brand. She's also been dubbed the fairy godmother of fashion. Aslaug, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the program today.
Thank you, Aslaug. Now, through the wonders of technology, I am chatting to you from my studio in the United States, but you are sitting in Iceland, which coincidentally, your company, Katla, is named after an Icelandic volcano, correct?
It is.
Okay.
Yes. So Katla is a volcano in Iceland, a very active and very powerful volcano, but it's also a female name.
Ah.
So some of our volcanoes we name after women. So to me, the name represents kind of female power. And I thought that was very appropriate. But also the brand draws in a lot of inspiration from nature, and our mission is to protect and respect people, animals, and the environment in everything we do. So I thought it was very appropriate to have a name that was drawn from Icelandic nature.
That's awesome. And you said it, and I was going to ask you about it, but we hear the phrase sustainable products from time to time now. What does that actually mean for the layperson who is not, the what do they call you, the godmother of fashion? What is a sustainable product or fashion mean?
So it's a really interesting question. When I started looking at this, I was really surprised to see how many different definitions there are of what sustainable fashion means. And it's very hard to make sense of it. And you need to really study it.
Good. I'm glad I asked you then, because it sounds like there's a lot coming here. You got a lot to unpack before you get to it. So I'm glad I've got you to answer the question.
Yes. It means a lot of things. So what we tried to do with Katla was to approach it in as holistic a way as possible. To some people, sustainable means the same as ethical fashion, as in that the people that are involved in the production are working under safe conditions, that they are receiving a minimum wage. Others think about it from the impact on animals, not entailing any cruelty to animals in fabric selection, etc. And then many define it from the perspective of impact on the environment.
Okay, so you have this sustainable format that you're following. What are you making with this with Katla? So what are some of the things you're making as part of your brand?
So our brand so far is we're making apparel. So we're not yet making any accessories. Our apparel is primarily designed for women, although many of our garments have ended up becoming unisex. We have many men wearing them as well, particularly our hoodies and sweatshirts. But in terms of, how are these garments sustainable, there are a few things that go into that. Part of it is about the fabric selection. So we're very careful that the fabrics we select have been processed in an environmentally friendly way. For example, how they are dyed, that there's no pollution to water. We're also animal cruelty free. So we don't work with leather or fur. We also don't work with silk. A lot of people don't realize that traditional silk is created by boiling silkworms live. Yes. So we don't use silk. We use kind of plant-based alternatives to silk. We do use some synthetics, but whenever we use synthetics, we want them to be recycled. So we're taking plastics from the ocean, for example, create our fitness wear.
I'm not one to tell you, how to do things, but it seems like you're making your job really hard, because as I can imagine, being in the fashion industry and launching a new brand is difficult. But then to put yourself in this box where you're following all these rules, why are you doing this to yourself? It seems like there's easier ways to create a brand.
Well, I think it's really important to just take a very strong stance here and to try to do this thoughtfully. I don't think there was any point for me to go out and create another fashion brand that's not sustainable, that there are enough of them. I really wanted to do something that could be a good example, that hopefully also through it, we could, in a positive way, educate consumers and try to nudge the industry a little bit forward. Everyone in the industry needs to move towards a more sustainable way of working. And we wanted to help contribute towards that movement.
Okay. Since you're talking about sustainable fashions, let's talk about fast fashion. The basic premise is inexpensive clothing produced quickly by retailers in response to the latest trends. Places like H&M built an empire on that, but you're seeing companies now like Forever 21 closing down stores. You on the other spectrum, where do you see the future of fast fashion going?
So I think more and more people are concerned about the impact of fast fashion on the world. There's a lot of overproduction of inventory within the fashion industry. There's 30 to 40% overproduction of inventory. 3 out of 5 garments end up in landfill each year. So I think more and more consumers are starting to think about their choices, and more consumers want to buy fewer but better items that will last. And then, you see many younger consumers also are shifting to vintage or rented items. It's predicted that vintage items will overtake fast fashion over the next few years. So,
interesting.
Yeah, I do think we're going to see a faster movement over the next few years towards sustainable fashion than we have. I mean, there's been a big shift in consumer mindset over the last 2 to 3 years, but I think COVID has moved to even further accentuate that mindset shift.
So speaking of COVID, one of the byproducts of the coronavirus was unemployment and people working from home, which meant people just didn't have to dress up anymore. What kind of long-term effects, if any, on the fashion industry when it comes to clothing? Because especially we've had multiple generations of people growing up in, look your best, your Sunday best, wear your nicest outfits, first day of school, buy new clothing. Now that we're in this world where there's going to be a large chunk of people, unfortunately not working, and then there's another chunk of people that are working from home, will that have some sort of long-range effects in the fashion industry, you think?
I think it will. I think this period will certainly have a long-term effect. Some people are predicting that people are just going to be wearing sweatpants forevermore. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I do think fashion companies have realized that the system that we have, most fashion companies have been working within, this whole industry structure, doesn't make any sense anymore. There's been this, constant creation with multiple seasons each year, and you always have to be creating new. And what you bought 6 months ago is no longer relevant. And I think more and more people are seeing that this system doesn't work. It's damaging for the environment, but it also doesn't work financially. I do think consumers will come out of this being more thoughtful about their choices, wanting to have a more positive impact. Obviously, more consumers have moved towards online shopping. Fashion industry was relatively slow to move online. So I think most brands during this period have tried to really strengthen their e-commerce capabilities. And I think more and more consumers are now comfortable shopping online, and this really just accentuated that. So I do think the importance of the physical retail store will not be the same as it was. I think also more and more brands might move to having less seasonal merchandise. That means potentially that we're going to see more classic styles that have longevity. So it may actually impact the style that we see in some ways.
It's funny, you remind me, because I talk to entrepreneurs all the time, and we joke about the phrase that's used, retail is dead. It's uttered in business circles, business media, but it's so silly to think that, because retail hasn't died. People are still buying stuff. Regardless of a recession or depression or existential crises that we're experiencing, people still buy stuff. In my opinion and others, traditional brick and mortar may be dead, but the combination of, like you mentioned, the brick and mortar with the e-com, that's got to be the future here. If you are a brick and mortar, if you don't have a strong e-com, you're dead.
100%. Retail is certainly not dead. Of course, people have been buying less clothes during this period of time, but I think people will continue to buy clothes as we come out of this period. But brands need to think differently about their sales channels. You absolutely have to have strong e-commerce. But I think even for those that start as e-commerce brands, having some real world presence is important. It's important to interact with your customers directly on a regular basis. So I don't think we're going to see physical retail spaces completely disappear, but I think their importance will diminish. There will be fewer of them, and e-commerce will be more and more important.
You know what I see the future as, especially for maybe even brands like yourselves, like that are e-com companies, is the idea of pop-up shops. Because now people just want to experience things. So if you open up a pop-up shop for a few months where people could come and see it and take photos and share it, that's good. There's no need to sign these multi-year leases at a strip mall or a mall anymore, because if you do have that strong e-com and you're just trying to brand build, all you need is to just have a few opportunities out there where you can show people who are so old school they need to touch and feel and try things on. That could be the way where things are going nowadays, where, it's like these Halloween stores that take over these empty lots during the fall. You'll see stores, e-com companies just pop up every once in a while, be like, hey, look, you could check out our stuff here or here or here. What do you think about something like that?
I completely agree. I think pop-ups are going to be more and more important. Obviously, it's a lower risk, lower cost way of interacting directly with your consumers, but it also allows you to travel and meet more consumers. If you're investing in a retail store, you're a luxury brand, or you might open your first store in New York, or you might open your first store in LA or San Francisco. But if you're doing pop-ups, it means you can travel around the country and meet customers all over. There are different forms. You can actually rent a space, or Warby Parker was famous back in the day for driving around with a bus around the country. And so doing an even smaller version of a pop-up, but really being able to interact with a lot of people. And we were actually planning to follow a somewhat similar form. We have an Airstream trailer in the Bay Area, which we were planning to drive around the Bay Area to begin with and meet with customers outside of their office buildings, etc. So those are kind of mini pop-ups, but I definitely believe in pop-ups. It's not enough to be only online. You need to be able to talk to people.
So I'm glad.
Yes.
I'm glad you agree, because I'm not as dumb as I look. I as I was thinking, I'm like, what if she thinks that's like the stupidest idea? How will I segue out of that? So I'm glad you agreed with that. Not that I'm professing to be an expert or anything like that, but it just seems like common sense.
I 100%. It makes a lot of sense, and it allows you, to go outside of the U.S. and maybe you do a pop-up in London or in Reykjavik.
All right, so let's talk about Katla, because before we go, how are you, starting a company that's relatively new, then you have this pandemic rolling in. How has that put stress on you? How are you surviving? Tell me about your thought process about, beginning of March when this all went down.
So Katla went live on January 28th.
Oh, great.
So
great timing. All right.
Yes. So about 6 weeks before lockdown. We had been in a small beta before then. I guess a few things. Like every fashion company has, or almost every fashion company has felt it during this period. So even those that are selling purely online have experienced a decline in consumer demand. People just aren't shopping as much for clothing. So of course we needed to react from a cost standpoint to just minimize our overall cost structure. But the good thing about our business model is that most of our manufacturing is on demand. So we are not tied to the typical fashion seasons, and we are not building up inventory. We work with an awesome factory down in Alabama that is very top-notch and cutting edge in terms of on-demand manufacturing.
Wait a minute, you make your clothing in the United States?
All of our clothing is made in the United States, in California and in Alabama.
Aslaug, I'm telling you, you are making you're making this so much harder for you. You're starting this new company. You made things very difficult for yourself here.
Now, this is such an important part of the sustainability model. It's to be close to the customer, On-demand manufacturing is a very important part of our model because, as I mentioned earlier, the industry, one of the big issues with the industry and its impact on the environment is that it's producing 30 to 40% more than what it ends up selling to consumers. So we really wanted to tackle that part of the problem as well. This was very hard some years ago, but there are now progressive factories that are really committed to on-demand manufacturing and that are doing it very fast in 1 to 3 days. So doing on-demand and delivering in 6 weeks is not that compelling for most customers. They don't want to wait that long. But if you tell them the product's going to be ready in 1 to 3 days, and this is a much more sustainable way of manufacturing, then most people are willing to wait. So we produce a large portion of our items in Alabama and then the rest in California. And this actually was extraordinarily good for us during COVID. So our factories were able to stay open. We were not in the situation that many brands were in, that their product was either not yet produced when their factories in Asia closed or got stuck in shipments along the way. And then others had received their inventory, but their physical retailers were no longer available to take it. So this on-demand manufacturing model was really a blessing for us. It's extraordinarily good from an environmental standpoint, but it's a much more financially flexible model. And that allowed us to be in a much better financial situation during COVID.
That's great. I love that you brought up the on-demand structure because, I mean, that's sort of what Fanatics is built on. That the company that makes all the sports apparel, it's on demand. How is it that we got to this where we have the ability to make stuff on demand and get it to the consumer so quickly? How did that infrastructure happen? Because to me, it seems mind-boggling that this even, it's almost like Santa working in the North Pole with his elves, and all of a sudden you have these things. So how did this happen?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of things. So if you look at knitwear, for example, there is new technology there's 3D printing of knit items, which opens up huge opportunities in knitwear to do that very fast. When it comes to cut and sew, so like, for example, your hoodies, et cetera, a lot of your clothing, that is typically still made by people that are sewing those garments, cutting them and sewing them. But honestly, what's strange about this is to operate an on-demand facility for clothing, it's not as much an investment in technology, it's really a mindset. It's a decision that is how you're going to set up your system, that you are taking orders and producing, and you've set up your systems to do that rather than to bulk produce. So we were dealing with a lot of legacy issues in the industry where there's a structure built around seasons and department stores ordering months in advance and expecting it at a certain time and then selling it over a specific period of time. And everyone was kind of just producing
they were just trying to fill up shelves, essentially, right?
Yeah, fill up shelves, and just this was the structure. This was the way you were supposed to operate. That's how most of the industry functioned. And then you have more and more factories now that are saying, no, this can be done differently. This can be done. We can make on demand. And there's a lot of discussion also about the local versus producing abroad. And one of the things that people have realized during COVID is this risk factor in terms of getting the merchandise over. And they're kind of rethinking a little bit, how do you think about the price of an item? If you just think about the manufacturing cost of one unit, for example, in China versus the US, that's one thing. But if you take into account all of the risks associated with getting the product over and on time, et cetera, that really changes the paradigm. So I do genuinely believe that there's going to be a big push towards on-demand manufacturing, that more and more brands are going to move in that direction. So we're going to see a really big shift over the next few years.
All right, one last question before I let you go. So sustainable was sort of the theme of our conversation, but how sustainable is the sustainable fashion industry? Like you said, it's brand new. You guys are moving paradigms here. This is a whole new world. Are you confident that there is part of that fashion industry? I mean, obviously you're not going to change everything overnight, but that sustainable fashion can find a niche or even a larger niche to survive in the industry?
I think all of fashion has to become sustainable eventually. I hope so. I don't think it's a niche. I think there's a growing number of consumers that demand sustainable fashion. If you look at customer segments in America, for example, I looked at social media data to see customers that are interested in runway fashion versus sustainable fashion. There are more women in America interested in sustainable fashion than runway fashion in every age group under 50. And the younger you go, the more that interest is and the bigger that gap is. So I don't think this is niche. I think this is where fashion needs to go. And I think the bigger fashion brands realize that too, and they are trying to move in that direction. It's just going to take some time to recreate supply chains for the very big fashion companies.
That's great. Her name is Aslaug Magnúsdóttir. She is the CEO and founder of Katla. This sounds like an amazing concept. Hopefully you start making clothes for guys. If do you mind working on that, Aslaug? I mean, again, I don't want to tell you how to run your business, but if you give us an option to, maybe have a couple things, because it sounds and looks like you guys are making some cool things. It'd be nice to, have something for me, if you can work on that.
You should definitely get one of our hoodies.
Okay.
They're very cool, and men love them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I'll check it out. What is the website for people who want to check out your stuff?
It's Katla.com, Katla.com.
Aslaug, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.